I thought for a while this evening that the elders were playing a big trick on me because they had said, we're going to meet at the regular time tonight. And it was almost 6, and I finally found Loy, and I thought, okay, that's encouraging. And then Leroy did show up too, and we already knew that Alan's going to be gone. And since I came, we're all accounted for. That's good. And we're glad to see you. Thanks for being here, all of you. I kind of take a clue from Steve that if I get in the pulpit this quickly, I probably shouldn't wait till 7 o'clock to get out. Did you have that in mind? First of all, he said we're going to sing the song slower than usual. Then he said we're going to sing all 4 verses, and then he cut me short. It's all different. But I'm ready. We're going to talk about being on the Jericho Road tonight. Road trips are always interesting, aren't they? People seem like they just aren't fulfilled in the summertime until they've gone on a road trip. Got to go somewhere, got to have the snacks. I've seen people take trips that they need to pick up truck in order to haul all the snacks that they take with them. And then the trip is interesting because of the road and the route. It's interesting because of all the people that you can meet along the way, the things you can learn that you hadn't expected, the things you can find in the cities to which you go, in the areas that you never knew existed. That all is just so fulfilling as you go along. I like to study maps. Even if I'm not going somewhere, I just like to memorize kind of the map and what's close to where that city is. And you can't do that with a GPS. Those things are so unreliable. I'm so frustrated by them. And I always remember a story when I was working back in Tennessee. There was a young lady who eventually married one of our young men who started coming to church, and she was really interested, and she soon was baptized. And she was one of those people that wanted to go out to gospel meetings and learn all she could as fast as she could. In our particular county, there were a lot of rural congregations. And if you left the county seat town of Lawrenceburg and went just a little bit to the west and south, you came to the Salem Church. And if you turned just before you got to it, you could go by the Pea Ridge congregation. That was one of the real big ones. And then it led still further and further and further out to Sims Ridge. And Sims Ridge was to the left after a crossroads, but hardly anybody knew where it was except the people who lived in the neighborhood. And she went to the gospel meeting, and on her way out there, she couldn't get directions. And someone told her that there'd be a sign, but she didn't find one. She got almost to the next county, and she decided, I've got to go back. And then she finally came to a crossroads with a stop sign, and it had one of those signs that says church down that way. And she said, I decided I'll take a chance. Maybe that's it. And sure enough, it was. And so whenever services were over and she was ready to go home, this time she said, I sat my GPS, but all it said was no way home. That's the way they always want to do me. But when you go on these road trips, there's some things that you need to be aware of, and some of them are suggested on this Jericho Road. And I want to read tonight from Luke chapter 10 about what was happening when Jesus talked about the man that went down to Jericho, and see if there aren't some principles that would be applicable to us in our journey. We're all on a journey. We call it life. And in this life, there are certain twists and turns and things. We meet people, we learn things, and we sometimes take the right route, and sometimes we get lost. And so we're looking for the things that might be beneficial to us. The setting for this actually begins in verse 25. Jesus is in Jerusalem, And this translation reads, beginning there, behold, a certain lawyer. Some of your translations will say an expert in the law. And we usually think of a lawyer as being somebody who may be a prosecuting attorney or maybe a real estate attorney. He might be a divorce attorney specializing in different things. But this one would have been a man who was a specialist in terms of understanding, knowing the Old Testament law, being familiar with the commentaries that had been written about it, and Hillel and Shammai, who were two of the leading theological people of the time. He would have been a guy who was informed. If you had a real important question, he's the one you might go to. Someone probably had asked him to come and pose the question, and that's the way it's introduced in verse 25. That certain lawyer stood and tested him. That tells you to begin with that this is not really a legitimate question, but he's trying to catch Jesus. There's a trap involved as he is testing him, saying, "Teacher, what should I do to inherit eternal life?" And he said to him, "What's written in the law? What is your reading of it?" I think that's one of the most fascinating answers. Just a few minutes ago, the gentlemen in the foyer were talking about a question that had been asked, and they were going on with that. And in this particular case, the individual who is an authority in the law asked Jesus that question, and Jesus said, "Well, you can read." I'm paraphrasing quite a bit. "You can read. You're familiar with the law, and it's exactly what the law says." Now, what have you found in the law? How do you read what a person should do to be pleasing to the Lord? And effectively, Jesus is saying, that's it. Whatever the law says to be done. Now, we don't want to overwork the setup here in regard to that, but be aware that when he referred to doing what the law required, that was the case. As long as Jesus was alive and upon the earth, the new covenant didn't come into effect until after he died and been raised from the dead, and actually seemingly not being applied until the apostles preached on the first Pentecost after the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so he was sending them to the right place. Today, we'd say, what does the Bible say? What does the New Testament teach about what people should do to please the Lord? That would be the question answer at this point in time, but it wasn't then because it wasn't now. And so he answered and said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, and with all your strength, and with all, I added the mind too soon, and your mind and your neighbor as yourself. He put off the answer just as long as he could, really. He iterated all the things about what he was supposed to do in his devotion to the Lord, and then he got around to, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's also required, and that's what the law says. Well, he could have been real pleased with the fact that Jesus said to him, "You have answered rightly. Go this, do this, and you will live. You've got it. Just do what you've learned, and you'll live." Seems like a simple question and a simple answer, and you would think, well, it just moves on from there. But Jesus decided to add something that we usually refer to as a parable, a story that has a point that's applicable to the situation, and some deep-seated points are involved in it. And it's very commonly known and referred to as the parable of the Good Samaritan. And the way it's posted is that he said, wanting to justify himself to Jesus, "Who is my neighbor? I'm supposed to love my neighbor, but who is that?" Well, you don't pick on Jesus, you know. That's really what he's doing. He's picking and punching at Jesus whenever he says, "Who is my neighbor?" And then Jesus answered and said, "A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, who stripped him of his clothing and wounded him and departed, leaving him half dead." Some translations give you the inference that they thought he was dead. Now, by chance, a certain priest came that way, down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And likewise, a Levite, whenever he had arrived at the place, came and looked and passed by on the other side. But as a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, he came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him. And he went to him, and he bandaged his wounds, pouring in oil and wine. And he set him on his own animal and brought him to the inn, and he took care of him. And on the next day, when he departed, he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and he said to him, "Take care of him, and whatever more you spend when I come, I will repay you." And so, which of these 3 do you say was the neighbor to him who fell among the thieves? And he said, "He who showed him mercy." And then Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." Go and do that, he's saying. I think, as I said, that there are some things about this trip this man is making and the man himself that are interesting to us. We meet a lot of people along the way on our journey, a lot of different people as we go through life. And those people then have a great deal of influence upon us. And whether we finish our journey or where we may turn and where we may go, to a large extent may depend upon those people and the influence that they have upon us. Jeremiah said that the way of man is not in himself, it is not in man that walketh to direct his own footsteps. We do get a lot of help from other people, but if you get the help from the wrong people, then you're going to get the wrong directions. Proverbs chapter 2 and following really deals a great deal with that in the wise man's instruction that he gave to the younger man about be careful who you throw in with. And these people who are bloodthirsty and conniving, don't pitch in with them, even though they promise you that you're going to get great rewards and share the profits of what you may steal and take from other people. Don't go there. So get better people to give you advice. And the scriptures, of course, are referring to the fact primarily that we ought to get our direction not from GPS, not from our neighbors and our friends, but just like Jesus said to this lawyer, you go to the law, you go to the Word. And then what does it say? That's what you do. It's very simple. The route is simple. Follow the map. Follow the instructions the Lord has given. Proverbs 16 and verse 24, and also in chapter 14 and verse 12, the scripture says the same thing. There is a way which seemeth right unto man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. I have been lost, haven't you, in various places. I always like to believe that I have a sense of direction. When the sun's not shining, your sense of direction is really tested. And sometimes I've been in places that just, the roads just get smaller and the weeds get higher, closer and closer. And you know, it only takes about 10 miles of that till Willie says, "This is probably not right." And I try to reverse. In life, we're going to find those things where it seems that there are hedges that keep on saying, not here, don't go there. And if we are wise, we learn. and we turn around and we go back. It's called repentance, rethinking those things. The way that seems right isn't always right. And we may say, well, why can't I get this right? Why is my own thought and my opinion, the conclusions that I draw personally, why is that not always trustworthy? Why can't I do this? God explained it in Isaiah chapter 55, verse 8 and 9, whenever he said, my ways are not your ways, my thoughts are not your thoughts, for as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways and your ways, and so are my thoughts and your thoughts. It's a different plane. It's a different kind of insight. And God said, you need to get your instructions. You need to use a map that I have given you. You call it the Bible. Don't depend on somebody or something else. I'll give you the right direction, and I will lead you where you need to go. But not only is the route important, but the people that we are traveling with, or the ones that we may run into, or the ones that we may begin to travel with, also is important. 1 Corinthians chapter 15:33, there's the instruction to remember that bad companions corrupt good manners. That's the way one translation says it. Another says it corrupts good morals. We can know what's right, but you throw in with the wrong group of people, and it doesn't take very long until you begin to do the things that they do. When I'm addressing young people about these kinds of things, I try to help them to think about pot and all those other kinds of things that people sniff and smoke and drink still, that affect and influence their mind, and that their friends may want them to join them in it all. But the consequence of that's going to be very somber, not sober, but somber. And we need to choose our friends, our companions on this journey correctly. The Lord encouraged us not to become cohorts with those who are not Christians. We should come out from among them, be different, distinct, he said, and that we should not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. Some people learn that the hard way, and they get off into relationships and things that they're caught, they're in a bind, and they don't know what to do. But if they would have watched where they were going and with whom they were teaming and followed the Lord's advice on this journey, they wouldn't have ever got into that particular mess. Now, this guy that Jesus talks about is interesting in that he met up with some people he didn't choose to meet up with, and some things happened to him that he had no idea would ever happen to him whenever he started on that journey. You see, he traveled, the scripture says, from Jerusalem down to Jericho. That's we'd say about 20 miles, 22, something like that. And it is down. It's actually looks more like it's going south and east, but they spoke in terms of elevation. And there's quite a decline in the elevation on that. Jerusalem's highest point is 2,700 feet above sea level, and Jericho is at about 825, 35 feet below sea level. You're doing some dropping in a 20-mile area. And I promise you, if you're a bicyclist, you'll enjoy going down there more than you will coming back up to Jerusalem, because it's something, Rob. I've made that same trip, not by bicycle, but I've seen that all along the way it's rugged. There's big stones out there and something that looks kind of like sagebrush that doesn't grow very tall. The only people you're likely to see when you're making that journey is you may see a good many groups of Bedouin with their goats and sheep. They're out there foraging and getting as much as they can from the soil and what grass there is. And as you come to one high peak, you may look down into there's a real crevasse there in between some mountains that are just as dry as they can be. But there's a spring somewhere back up there higher that you can't see. And it sends water down through the very bottom of that valley. And on the side of a rock mountain, the monks have carved out a monastery. When I say carved out, I don't mean they worked hard to build. They have carved it out of the mountainside. And because the water's coming down through there, it's green and trees grow, and there's that big monastery sticking out of the wall, but it's right, just been carved out of it. And you might see, but probably you won't be close enough to see any monks, and there's just not anybody traveling on there. Usually it's a lonely, lonely spot. And it becomes an excellent place for a waylaying, for carjacking if you had the cars, but he's not in that age, of course. And as he traveled along, he met some people that were unsavory, and they had no concern for his well-being. They weren't his neighbors in any sense of the word. And they stripped him, they took everything he had, and they took his money and they beat him, and they left him, this translation says, half dead. Maybe they thought he'd die before anybody would come along. But he had the experience of meeting some interesting people, because besides meeting those men who were opportunists and took advantage of him in every way they could, taking everything that belonged to him, you ever meet anybody like that on your journey? Have you ever run into someone in business or in the community or even at church who's going to give you a wonderful opportunity and behaves as though they're really, really interested in your welfare? They're opportunists. The scriptures say that you don't even trust all of the saints. You don't trust all the prophets. 1 John 4 and verse 1, for he said, there are many false prophets that are gone out into the world. When Peter and Jude are talking about the people who take advantage of other people in the church, they speak of them being opportunists and taking advantage of those who may be naive. As we go through this life, we will meet some of those opportunists along the way also. And some of them will be people that we had every reason to believe would be trustworthy, but they took advantage. He could have perhaps expected that from those strangers, but now he's lying there half dead. And I've heard preachers talk about how encouraged he must have been whenever, maybe out of one eye blurry, he sees someone's coming, and that person gets close enough that he sees, that's a priest. That's a priest. I'm going to get some help now. He's a man of God. He gets in the temple and he preaches and he teaches the people, and he offers the sacrifices, and everybody knows the priest is going to, and the priest looked at him and just walked away, didn't get involved at all. How disappointing. When the people who ought to be concerned for our welfare just kind of hedge around us, and they won't look at us, and they don't pay attention, and they don't help. There's a lot of hypocrisy that existed during the time of Jesus. He attacked it very often in his ministry. There's a lot still today. We just want to make sure of two things in regard to that. One, we don't want to be hypocritical ourselves, and we want to, as far as we can, avoid being taken by others who should be interested in our soul and our welfare, but might take advantage of us. Well, I don't know how long it was after the priest was gone till a Levite came. Now, he's really going to be offering the sacrifices in the temple. He's of the tribe from which the priests are supposed to be taken. And so he would be encouraged again. And it sounds like, I can't tell you that I know this was the case, but it sounds like that he actually walked up there and looked at him a while, considered the situation, and then he skirted him also and went on his way. We don't know why those men did that, and I guess I'm to some extent impugning their motives whenever I say that they didn't care. But something's going on. I've heard preachers talk about the fact that maybe they were on the way and they were supposed to preach, at 10:30. And if they stop and help somebody, they're going to be late. And everybody's going to be inconvenienced. And some people are going to be just downright dissatisfied that you were not here on time. You talk about starting services on time, and the idea of you not being on time, they might have had some of that. I think it's more. The Levite also went on, and how could they have had something more important than helping their fellow man who was obviously in distress and trouble at the moment? And yet, we may not stop unless it looks like it's somebody we know. A fire at a house, even a flat tire, an automobile accident. Would we say, hey, I got to get to the church on time? Or would we be getting involved? I don't know. But on life's journey, there are some decisions that have to be made like that. And there's somebody who's depending on us to come through, to be a neighbor, to be a friend, to be a helper at that time. And we need to make sure that we are fulfilling the responsibility that we have as Christians and living up to, and not being religionists who don't come through with practicing Christianity. We encourage people to attend the services. We encourage a great deal, so much so that we're discouraged when they don't come ourselves. But the Lord didn't say go into all the world and conduct services. He said go everywhere and teach people. If someone had an opportunity to help someone or to teach someone, then we should be considerate of that journey and the difference that it might make in someone's life. And so, finally, this man who must have been thinking, is there no one left in the world who cares? Eventually, through no effort of his own, he, as we say, he met a person who cared. People who study this parable and try to get to the very depth of what Jesus might have had in mind and wanted to imply often say that this Good Samaritan who came up that hill represented Jesus. Well, I'm not sure where parabolically he was to represent Jesus as a character, but he sure did represent Jesus in caring. He represented him in fulfilling the standards that the Lord has set in terms of taking care of his neighbor. And he seemed to have gone the extra mile as well. For not only did he stop, and not only did he administer first aid to him, he also then put him on his own animal and took him to some inn where he must have been a regular customer himself, stopping there from time to time, and took care of him overnight. And then the next day he left money to take care of his needs for some more time, maybe until he expected to be back in 2 days. But told the innkeeper, who seemed to have known him well enough and trusted him to believe that would be the case, if there's more necessary, when I come back, I'll repay you for that too. That's the extra mile, isn't it? So along the way, as in our journey, we're going to meet some people we have to be skeptical about. We're going to have to meet some people that we have to really watch out for. But we're going to meet some good people too. Don't let the people who are sometimes not what they ought to be cause you to be suspicious of everybody, and appreciate those people who care. This guy's not the one who's expected. The priest and the Levite, they should have been expected to help. A Samaritan doesn't fit in anywhere in the Jewish system. He's an outcast. And the people of the time would not go through Samaria if they could help it, because they thought they'd be contaminated by mixing with those people who had themselves mixed back in Samaria in the 8th century BC. They'd violated the teachings of God as to intermarrying with those who worshiped idols. And from that time on, when their capital was destroyed in 722-21 BC, they've never been a nation ever again. There are some of them still existing there in Israel, and about as many scattered in other places of the world. But it's just not the kind of guy that you would normally say, he's going to stop and help me. But the heart is what makes the difference in those things. And God puts people in our way who will help us and bless us. In fact, Paul said he will make everything work together for good to them that love the Lord. That does not mean nothing bad will ever happen, but he puts us on a path so that most things that happen are going to lead toward a good end for those who are righteous. And that's the good end that we're looking for. So the third point I'd say in this, we need to plan our journey, our life, as well as we can, moving carefully to avoid the pitfalls. Paul said in 1 Thessalonians 5:22, avoid even the very appearance of evil. Try to stay away from those pitfalls or those cliffs where you might fall off, the danger zones. Just stay away from those, and you'll be much safer on the journey that we call life. And avoid encounter with the bad ones as much as you possibly can, the bad people who would be a bad influence on you and hurt you along the way. The beautiful solution to all of this is found in this final suggestion, and that is, be the one who does the help, does the helping. Be the one that represents Jesus. Be the one who's meeting the needs of other people. When Peter described Jesus to the household of Cornelius, he said he went about doing good and helping all the people. That's our calling. When Jesus talked about the judgment in Matthew chapter 25, he said, ultimately, when you did it not unto one of these, the least of your brethren, you did it not unto me. That's right after he told them, depart from me. You see, he's watching these things, and he knows the turns that we have in our lives. And Paul recommended in Galatians chapter 6 and verse 10, as we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men. When we find a chance to help someone, then we find an opportunity to do something very good. And I could tell you a bunch of soul-saving stories. I'll refrain from doing so tonight, but there are case after case that I've seen through my ministry, where somebody stopped to help someone and who was in distress, and there wound up being a soul-saving experience from it. Ultimately, that person opened their heart to the gospel, and a soul was saved. But it started by an act of kindness. Along the way, the journey that we take, not only does God put good people in our way that will help us, but I believe he also puts those who are needy in our way, on our path, so that we will find them. And when we are soul conscious, aware of what our calling is to be a neighbor to those who are lost, then we will capitalize upon those opportunities. And there'll be a lot more good Samaritans because we've practiced Christianity. That's the lesson on the Jericho Road. If tonight you're subject to the invitation of Jesus in any way, we're going to be singing the song of encouragement and inviting you to say yes to the Lord by coming to be baptized or to ask for prayers. Whatever your need may be, come while we stand and sing.